I've had this 2-litre MX5 now for 35,000 miles, and in that time it's taken me and my partner on 3 holidays. One to the north of Scotland, around parts of the North Coast 500. We've driven it down to Italy and down to Spain. I've done 19 track days in it and done a total of 2,600 miles on track. And unfortunately, I lost the car's warranty long before it was due to expire due to those track days and some skids. In this video, I'm going to tell you what's gone wrong with the car since my last update, how much it's cost me, and something interesting about the gear oil they put in the gearbox from factory in this car that you may want to know if you're thinking of getting one. Fortunately, not a lot has gone wrong with this car since the last update, although this did fail. This is the auxiliary belt tensioner. The belt runs along here and this keeps tension on the belt. When I was servicing the car, I noticed it had oil on it and dirt sticking to the oil, and I thought, that doesn't look right. Maybe I need to replace that, and I'm glad I did, because when I was trying to remove this, you need to twist this like that to take tension off the belt, and then that compresses, but it wouldn't compress. Tried harder and harder, and eventually it sort of sounded like it broke, compressed, and then stayed compressed. When I put the new one on, it would compress and decompress smoothly as it should to put tension on the belt and take tension off. Fortunately, I noticed it when I was servicing. It didn't cause a belt to wear quickly and snap, and if the auxiliary belt did snap, that could take out the coolant pump belt as well, because that's next to it. So whilst I was there, I changed both the auxiliary belt and coolant pump belts, even though they looked fine. £45 for both those belts, genuine from Mazda, and Mazda wanted over £240 for this, but I noticed it said INA on it, and I recognise that brand, so I went online and found it for £80, and it was an easy job to do. Just airbox out, belts off, didn't need to do the coolant pump belt, but did that anyway. A nut and a bolt to take this off, and a nut and a bolt to put it back on. Make sure you use a torque wrench, because I believe the stud for the nut is aluminium. You don't want to over tighten that, because you could stretch it. Put the belts on, put the put the airbox back on, and then that's job done for 80 quid. So quite pleased with that. Oh, and there is actually a technical service bulletin out for these, because Mazda do know about it. They know they fail, they leak oil from here and then stop doing their job as they're supposed to. They do have an updated part, and I believe this is supposed to be the updated part, although I could be wrong about that, because I was trying to make sense of the serial numbers and I'm not sure if I was successful, but due to the age of the vehicle, I believe this should be the updated one, yet it still failed. If you lost your auxiliary belt, if this caused your auxiliary belt to fail quickly, then you may make it home if you have enough charge in the battery, because the auxiliary belt does your air conditioning and charges your battery. But if you're further away from home, you won't. And the other problem is, if the auxiliary belt fails, that could then take out the coolant pump belt, which means you need to stop driving pretty much immediately. So if I was you, I'd look at your auxiliary belt tensioner, look at this bit here, see if it's covered in oil. If it is, I recommend replacing it. Another problem you may have is that if the auxiliary belt tensioner fails in such a way that it's putting too much pressure on that auxiliary belt, then that pressure may also be on both the alternator and air conditioning compressor as well, because the auxiliary belt on this engine does both the alternator and air conditioning compressor. And if that's the case, the bearings in both of those components could be under more pressure too, which in theory means they could wear out more quickly. It's not going to happen overnight, but over a long period of time that could happen. In this video, I'm not going to go over every niggly problem this car has or everything that's ever gone wrong with this car, because I think I did a pretty good job of that last time. I'll leave a link to that video up there, and if that thing that pops out up there is not popping out, I'll leave a link in the description as well. Now, I did go over everything in that video, and it may sound like I'm being negative towards the car, but I'm not. I'm just doing my job. I'm listing everything that I ever find with this car, every problem I ever find, and I'm telling you. It's up to you as to whether or not you think that problem is actually a problem that concerns you. In my last update video, I mentioned that one of the alloy wheels was replaced under warranty because the top coat, the lacquer, was peeling, and that all the other wheels were fine. But recently, one of the wheels has started to lose paint easily. It only started happening in the last couple of months, but every time I clean that wheel, it seems to have less paint. Now, I've only ever cleaned the wheels with water, apart from once when I used this. This is Built Amber. I've been using this for years. I think it's great on wheels. It's one of those ones when you spray it on the wheel, it turns purple, and I believe it's not acidic. But generally, I try to avoid chemicals on this car when I clean it. I try just to use water. It's generally all I use. But before track days, I tend to put this stuff on it, Hybrid Solutions ceramic spray coating by Turtle Wax, because I find if I put this on the wheels before a track day, it's easy to get the brake dust off. Whether or not this has made the finish weaker, I don't know, but it's just one of the wheels at the moment seems to be losing paint. I still have seat belts that won't retract on their own, but I may have found a solution. Well, kind of. It's called K2 Belso seatbelt spray. Pull the seatbelt out, spray it on the belt as it goes back in, and it does work. The belt then self-retracts. But there is a problem. Firstly, it only lasts about a month or two. Okay, you can do that every couple of months, not a big deal, but it feels greasy, like this can feels greasy, and the seatbelt feels greasy afterwards as well. However, you can't see the grease, it just feels it. If I touch the steering wheel now, there's no grease from my fingers going on the steering wheel, it's clean. However, there is a bigger problem. When I applied it to the seatbelt, the spray went all over the car, little dots everywhere, and it took me ages to clean the interior of the car after that. So I've only used it once. I'm not going to bother to use it again. Maybe if you're less fussy about how clean your interior is, you may want to give it a go because it does work. But what I'm doing is just making sure I remember to put the seatbelt back and try my best to remember if the passenger has put theirs back too, to make sure the belt doesn't damage the door jamb. Now for the thing that I found very interesting, and that's when I replaced the gear oil on this car. To be honest, this isn't actually gear oil, it's diff oil, but it looks the same. I'm just using it as a prop. I've recycled all of the gear oil, and I've kept this just in case I decide to send the diff oil or a sample of the diff oil off to the lab. Not sure if I will, don't think I need to because the diff seems fine, but maybe I'll change my mind later, so I'll keep it a bit longer. But I got the results back from the lab for the gear oil that I took out of this car, the genuine Mazda gear oil. And the results are viscosity, good. Wear metals, good. But the elemental profile is strange for gear oil. This looks more like engine oil SAE20. So it's got the elemental profile of SAE20 engine oil, but it does have the correct viscosity of the gear oil this car needs. I was not surprised by this because I have heard that the gear oil that Mazda use isn't normal. I've heard that it's very low quality, but I'm coming to the conclusion that it's not low quality, it's just different. It's what this gearbox needs, because when I put high quality GL4 gear oil in it from Miller's Oils, the correct specification for this gearbox, it was horrible. The gears were stiff. Second gear would crunch when it was cold. It wouldn't sound like a crunch, you wouldn't hear it, but you'd feel the crunch as you put it in. And until it was up to temperature, it was horrendous. And getting reverse, good luck. I had to double declutch several times before I could try and get reverse. I can't get the genuine oil myself, which is why I used Miller's Oils. I'm sure Miller's Oils is a high quality oil. Lots of people say it's high quality. I've used them myself for a while now. But it's just this gearbox needs a very specific type of oil. I can get the genuine oil though if I get the main dealer to replace it. I can't buy the oil myself, but if I pay the main dealer to replace it, they can put the genuine oil in. So I went back there, got them to put the genuine oil in, and now the gearbox feels just fine as it did before. To be fair, the gearbox was fine once it got up to temperature, but when it was cold, that alternative gear oil did not feel good, and it took like 15 minutes before it did start to feel okay. Why are so many people recommending an alternative gear oil for these MX5s, well, this generation, this ND MX5? Well, it's because they are prone to gearbox failure, particularly the 2016 model year. And it's true, different gear oils are going to influence the temperature of the gearbox, and different gear oils are going to behave differently at different temperatures. So therefore, yes, a different gear oil is going to influence when a gearbox can fail. Is the genuine stuff better, or the alternative that somebody else is recommending better? Well, I don't know. There's no cold, hard evidence that I've seen. But what I do know from experience is that the genuine stuff is much better for gear shift feel, and the non-genuine stuff, when cold, it makes it feel like I'm doing harm to the gearbox when changing gear. It doesn't feel right at all. I was at Trackmon, Northwest Wales, Anglesey, doing a track day 8 days ago, and there was another white MX5, a 2016 model year, doing the same thing. And guess what happened? His gearbox failed. From what I could tell, it failed because gear 3, the gears stripped. It would go into gear 3, you'd lift the clutch up, it wouldn't move, it would just make a horrendous sound. And in gear 1, it would move but still have the horrendous sound. Now, if he did that exact same day but had a different gear oil, would that gear failure, or gearbox failure should I say, have happened? Well, I just don't know. I'm just editing the video and I've realised I've missed something out that I wanted to include from the owner's manual, because it's a bit misleading in which gear oil you should use. It says use the genuine stuff. Okay, it doesn't actually say that, it's a bit more long-winded. It says using Mazda original long life oil IS is recommended, or use the genuine stuff. But it doesn't specify which viscosity of the genuine stuff to use. And you can get the genuine oil in more than one viscosity. Okay, but it does hint at which viscosity, and this is where this book is misleading. Because if you read on, it says if you can't get the genuine stuff, use standard oil API GL4 75W-80. So there's the hint, 75W-80. That's the viscosity that the ND MX5 gearbox needs. No. Speak to Mazda UK and they recommend that you use the genuine gear oil but with the viscosity of 75W-80. And I've used both. I've used the genuine 75W-80 and the genuine 75W-80, and they are not the same when cold. Up to temperature, I can't tell the difference, but when cold, they are very different, which is odd because the cold number, the 75W, is the same. But the 75W-80 makes my MX5 feel the way it did when it was new. Using the 75W-80, well, cold shifts are more tricky, they're stiffer, particularly first to second, and getting reverse when cold can be difficult as well. Nowhere near as difficult as the non-genuine stuff, but more difficult nonetheless. But all the gear oils I've used once up to temperature were fine. Now, it being only an 80, does that mean it's not going to protect the gearbox when on track when temperatures are higher? Well, I'm not so sure, because according to Paul Roddison, he's a guy who races the MX5 and he fixes them, and he's well known for fixing the gearboxes on these cars. He says, according to his data, gearbox temperatures on the track don't actually go higher than they do on the road. It's just on the road, it takes a lot longer for the gearbox temperature to get there. So therefore, if the gearbox temperature is the same, that suggests you don't need a gear oil that can handle higher temperatures, or that is thicker at higher temperatures to protect the gearbox. That's what it suggests. 18 of the 19 track days I've done have been using the 75W-80 gear oil, and most of the miles I've done in my MX5 have been using the 75W-80 gear oil, and I haven't had a problem, but that's just my experience. 2016 seems to be the problematic year for gearbox failure on these cars, and then you get 2017, 2018, and gearbox failures seem to be less common, and then 2019 to 2021, I don't think I've heard of a gearbox failure yet. Possibly they are out there, they probably are, but I've not heard of it. However, recently, 2022 and 2023, gearboxes seem to be failing again. Why? What's happening? Well, in 2022, kinematic posture control was introduced. So it's obvious to look at that and go, well, is that causing the problem? But I'm not sure. Because you've got the engine putting torque through the gearbox, putting torque through the diff, that goes to the wheels. Then kinematic posture control is braking one of the wheels to reduce body roll. Now, does that mean the gearbox is under more strain as the engine is trying to power through the gearbox to the wheel, but the wheel's being braked? Well, the power should go through the diff and to the other wheel, but I'm not entirely sure how the conical limited slip differential is going to react to one wheel being braked when power is being sent to the wheel. So I'm not sure. Somebody else might know more about this in the comments if you let us know what you think. But it does seem to be the case that since 2022, gearbox failures have started to increase. I'm not sure about ND3 in 2024. Haven't heard of failures there yet. Whether they made some adjustments, I don't know. But unfortunately, it does seem that if you buy some of the later models, it doesn't mean you're going to be immune from gearbox failure. Something this car suffers from is the power plant frame creaking at the front where the gearbox is. There's 4 bolts there and they tend to come loose. This is why the dealership thought that my diff was failing. They heard the creaking sound, thought it was the diff, and that's when I found out that my warranty was voided, because they were like, you've been driving on track, you've been doing skids, you've damaged your diff, Mazda's not going to pay for it. But it turned out it was just the bolts on the power plant frame. They did them up for me because I didn't have a torque wrench long enough to do them up myself to get them to 200 Newton meters. The torque wrench goes to that, but only just, and it's not long enough for me to be strong enough to do it whilst laying under the car without feeling like I'm about to hurt myself. So I bought myself a nice long torque wrench. When I say long, it's a lot longer than that. And that makes it easier to do the wheel bolts up, and it's the same socket, I believe, for the wheel bolts as it is for the power plant frame bolts from memory. So I just use the same one. And when I do go to tighten them up, I do notice the ones at the front turn before it clicks at 200 Newton meters. So they are loosening up. I'm trying to do it every 6 months or so. The ones at the back though, they don't seem to come loose. So I recommend checking your power plant frame bolts to make sure they are not loose. And if you are hearing a creaking sound, well, that may be the problem. So there was never a problem with my differential and it still works fine today. I think I've kept this oil because I want to send it off to the lab for analysis just to see what they say. I haven't sent it off because I don't want to pay the 40 quid, but I've kept the oil for a reason, haven't I? So I think I should just send it off for analysis. What about tyres? Well, I've just got through a set of Michelin Pilot Sport 4 tyres that I paid for myself, although Michelin have just fitted Pilot Sport 5 tyres to this car for me to review. Now, they're not paying me, I'm not sponsored, they've given me the tyres to review and I can say what I like. But it's too early for me to say yet, so let's talk about the Pilot Sport 4 tyres. I did 20,086 miles on them before replacing them. They had around about 3-ish mil left, maybe slightly lower than 3 when I replaced them. 1,706 of those miles were on track. Now, the previous premium set of tyres that this car came with did 13,003 miles and 754 of those were on track. So it's done nearly an extra 1,000 miles on track. It's nearly doubled the mileage, really, than the previous tyres. And they do make the car feel more stable. I'm very happy with how progressive the car does slide when it goes into a slide, and I was very happy with how those tyres wore, so I can't recommend those tyres enough. Early impressions of the PS5 is that they have better grip in the wet. I haven't really tried them on a warm, dry day yet, only cold, dry days, but they seem to be better in the wet. However, I'm not sure. And that's because I've gone from worn old PS4 tyres to new PS5 tyres. And when you get new tyres, you should always expect them to be better than the old ones. You can't go, oh, this brand's so much better. You've got to try and remember what the previous set were like when they were new. From memory though, this car has never felt so stable in the wet as it does now on these PS5s. So I think in the wet so far, as I can tell, they are better, but I'll have to get back to you later on with more information when I have more experience with them. For brake pads, I'm using the standard genuine Mazda pads for the road. I really like the pedal feel they give and they work just fine. And I've got standard Paget discs at the front and standard EBC discs at the back. Why the different brands? Well, I'm trying to compare the corrosion resistant layers on both of the discs to see which one lasts longest. As for the track, I use standard discs, Paget discs all round, but they are dedicated for track use. I only use them on track with my Carbotech XP10 pads, which I adore. I can brake very hard and late consistently. They will fade, but it takes a lot to get them to fade. They're £500, but they seem to be lasting a long time, so they may actually be better value than the previous pads I've used. I'll put on screen what my predicted mileage is with these pads based on their wear so far and how many days I think I'm going to do. So they're £500, but the Ferodo DS 2500s were about £360 and I couldn't brake nearly as hard, and we'll see how they compare to the Carbotechs in terms of price when you consider how long they last. Also, the Carbotechs are carbon Kevlar. They don't seem to damage the wheels like sintered pads can, and they haven't caused any problems to the wheels. They do clean up nice, but I do put a protection layer on the wheel before the track day just in case. I've also tried Rodison brake pads, which again worked on track a bit like the DS 2500s, but they really didn't last long. I only got 2 days out of those. Oh, and this car doesn't have the larger Brembo brakes up front. It just has the standard brakes. But if I get the right compound of pad, I can get the braking I need on track. Yes, if I had the same compound on the bigger Brembos as I do on these smaller standard brakes, the Brembos would be a bit better, but they're only a little bit bigger. However, it's going to be a lot of money to change to those, so the way I see it, I'm better off putting my money into the compounder pad that's going to get me the performance I want anyway. It's a new day and it's 5 degrees Celsius and it's wet, and the road surface here isn't great. Head cam on, it looks like it's in front of my eyes, but it's not. I could easily read a book right now. And I'm going to see how quickly I can get to 60 miles an hour and then back to 0 on these Michelin Pilot Sport 5 tyres, which are summer tyres, ultra high performance summer tyres, but in these wintry conditions. So, first gear, let's get ready. I can't use all the power because I will wheel spin if I do. So around about that, now let's try and get it going. Smoothly does it. Up in the second, now no one behind me, looking for 60 miles an hour. Now braking as hard as I can. Full stop. Not sure how long that took, but I'll work it out from the edit and I'll put it on screen. But the acceleration especially, given it's only rear wheel drive, that felt impressive. Something else I wanted to mention about the Carbotech brake pads that I use on track is that they are very kind on the discs. You get the black transfer layer on the disc as usual with a lot of track brake pads that happens. In this photo you can see those little dots. That's actually the rain hitting the disc, but it's a nice smooth black transfer layer. The reason why I use track brake pads when I take my car on track is because I've done 3 track days on road pads and they didn't go well. I haven't taken this car to track on road pads yet because I learnt my lesson before I got this car. But in previous vehicles, when I've used road pads, the worst I've experienced is severe judder under braking because the pad is wearing too quickly and I've got a thick, uneven transfer layer onto the disc, meaning it's not smooth. And the best I've experienced is severe brake fade. So I don't get much out of the days, and I tend to end up spending a lot of money because I tend to destroy road brakes when I take them on track. I found the best thing to do is have road brakes and track brakes and switch between before and after a track day. It's more cost effective that way, and I get to look at the suspension before and after a track day as well. I don't recommend using track brakes on the road because that's not what they are designed to do. As for discs, I'm using dedicated discs now. I used to just switch out the pads, but I find if I switch out the discs as well, it doesn't take much longer, doesn't cost much more because the discs don't seem to wear much. But the pads last a bit longer. So that's why I've started doing that. But just standard road discs seem to do the job just fine. So after 35,000 miles, what do I still enjoy about this car? Well, it's fun to drive. It has enough power to be fun, but not so much power that it's a bit sketchy and I can't really access that power. It's also comfortable. I've driven it 13.5 hours from the top of Scotland to home in one day and felt fine. Yet, whilst being comfortable, it still manages to be agile. It's reliable as well. It gives me the confidence to drive 6 hours to northwest Wales, drive 150 miles around Trackmon circuit, the racing circuit, and know, or believe, I wouldn't say no, anything could go wrong, but I believe that the car is going to make it the 6 hours home without a problem, and it does. And I've done 19 track days in it, not worrying about whether or not it's going to break down. What I concentrate on is making sure I don't crash. And that moves me on to the next thing. It's safe. It's got steel bars here and rollover hoops here, which older convertibles didn't have. And I'm older and wiser now, and although I used to take cars on track without rollover protection, these days I don't want to. So this makes me feel a lot safer. It's also cheap to run. It does 50 miles per gallon at motorway speeds, and it costs about the same as a VW Golf to run. And it's filled with features that make using it pleasant, like climate control, really powerful heater and powerful air conditioning, heated seats, adaptive headlights to help me see at night, and a very wide angle rear camera, which I didn't like at first. I saw it on the bumper and thought, that looks ugly, that hole in the bumper. I wouldn't want that. Can I not have it? No, you have to have it. Okay, well, but these days I would actually pay extra for it because now I've actually used it, I can see how much it helps, and it's definitely worth the little hole in the bumper. If you're used to convertibles, you'll know when you try and look at the back from the left and the right, you can't see anything, you just see fabric. But with that camera, I can actually be in a parking space, reversing out of a parking space, and that camera is so wide, I can see traffic coming from the left and the right. There is something I really want this car to have. And when I tell this to people, they often look at me in a very bemused way. And sometimes they even get a bit angry with me. What is it? Well, it's adaptive cruise control and automatic steering on the motorway. Why could I possibly need that on a Mazda MX5? Well, we all use our cars in different ways, and I do a lot of long journeys. And my partner's Corolla has these systems, and I find driving her car on long motorway trips far less fatiguing and much more relaxing. So I end up driving her car quite a lot. And I end up finding myself in a beautiful place with a beautiful road in a Corolla instead of an MX5. And I'm like, damn it. If this car had those systems, I would enjoy this car more. And when I drive it to track days, I would enjoy that journey there and back more also. At the end of my last video, I did say that the ND3 MX5 has adaptive cruise control, but that's not enough to make me want to buy the new model, the ND3. However, having used the Corolla for over 1.5 years now, and now realising how much less relaxing this is on motorway journeys compared to that vehicle because of those systems, I think I've changed my mind. If the ND3 had adaptive cruise control and the steering, the motorway steering, I don't think one would be enough, but if it had both, I probably would buy the ND3. So how much has this car cost me? Well, there were some things done under warranty, and I explained that in my last update video. Since then, the only thing I've had to replace that I've had to pay for myself was that auxiliary belt tensioner, which was £80 for the genuine part that I found online. If you went to the dealer to have that done, I would calculate the part, an hour's labour plus VAT, approximately £350. It's lost about £3,000 a year in depreciation so far. It was 30,000 new. Now it's about £18,000. If I was to sell it, let's call it 17,000 for a quick sale. So that's just over £3,000 a year. And when it comes to running costs, it's the same as what you would spend on a VW Golf or Ford Focus. So that's tyres, brakes, fuel, insurance, tax. It's similar to that. It hasn't actually cost me more money than my older cars that I used to own, that I used to also do track days in. It's cost me just over £3,000 a year in depreciation, and the running costs on my older cars per year, if I averaged it out, I probably spent more than that. But if I didn't take my old cars on track, then they would be cheaper. But when you take old cars on track, I find they tend to break and cost a lot of money to repair. So in my experience, I've spent more money per year with older cars than this new car, but that's because of how I use them. It probably would be cheaper just to buy a car that's a couple of years old, where it still has a lot of the reliability, yet it's already lost a lot of its money, a lot of its value. The risk is, of course, it's a higher value car, so therefore if I crash it, I have a lot more to lose. Come to think about it, probably the worst thing I could do is buy an expensive old car, because it's expensive, therefore there's a lot of money to lose if I crash it. On track, it's going to be more likely to break down because the components are old and deteriorating, and those components are probably going to be expensive. And that's why I have this MX5 and not an Aston Martin V8 Vantage, despite when I bought this car I could have had a V8 Vantage for not much different money, but I thought this was probably a better decision. I thought I'd probably get more enjoyment out of this car overall than that one. Well, if you found this video interesting, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to get my future videos, and until the next one, cheerio.